Dear Mark and Lard, is Black Death the first film in years where Sean Bean isn't killed off in the first 10 minutes? Regards, Andy.
Yes, I know, it's a weird thing, isn't it? Scene Bean and the... shall we hear a bit of Scene Bean? I've got a clip which has got Scene Bean in it, also the magnificent David Warner. The story is Black Death, 14th century England. There is some Black Death around. There are some people living in a...
It's death.
It's death. It's black. And... They're the religious community. They're in a monastery, and they have heard tell that out there in the world there is. Oh, don't hear it from me. Let Scene Bean explain it, and listen out for David Warner. And David Warner turns up at the beginning and the end. You could always have more David Warner, but here's just to snitch it.
I am Ulrich, envoy to the bishop. What I say now does not leave these walls. Word has reached the bishop of a village that does not suffer as the rest do. They say it is a sanctuary from the pestilence.
There are many villages that have not been ravaged yet by the pestilence.
It is claimed these villages are beyond death's icy grasp.
And they are gravely mistaken.
These are difficult times. Such claims, however fantastical, can find favor with those less educated than you or I.
Precisely why we cannot fall foul of rumor and superstition.
God's grip on his people is loosened. We must ensure the flock is not tempted to look beyond God and church for answers. I must see for myself how this village is kept safe.
Now, you introduced that by saying it was a snitchet.
A snitchet.
Is a snitchet longer than a snippet?
It's shorter than a smidgen.
Is it a soupçon?
No, a soupçon is, I would say more than that. A smidgen is shorter than a soupçon, and a snitchet is shorter than a smidgen.
And a snippet?
That's longer than a that's longer than a yeah.
Anyway, it was good because your David Warner there sounded like Tony Benn.
He did. He's fantastic, isn't it? It's the character he plays in The Man with Two Brains is Dr. Necesta, isn't it? Of course, and he's in several other very, very important movies. He's in key role in Straw Dogs. He's the guy who famously loses his head in the original version of The Omen, which is something they struggled to reproduce in the remake. Anyway, I love David Warner. So the story is they go off in search of yon village which has not been struck down by the pestilence, and rumour is that the reason it hasn't been struck down by the pestilence is because they are doing ungodly things there. And then they get to the village, and then I don't want to spoil what happens, but essentially what you need to know is this. It's directed by Christopher Smith, who did Triangle, who came on the show. I was off that week, but he came on the show the week of Fright Fest, and I really like Triangle. It's a really good sort of ghostly thriller set on an ocean liner in which it's stripped down, very, very tight environment, small cast of characters, twisty idea, worked very well. Like him very much. And he's made films with Danny Dyer in the past. Here you have a terrifically pestilential air. I mean, that's what you need. For a film called Black Death, you want to feel the pestilence. And there is a lot of pestilence. There are some early scenes which actually reminded me to mention it for the second time, this out of Ken Russell's The Devils, the beginning of The Devils, the 17th century France overrun by plague, and there is that sense of a country completely overrun by some horrible corrupt infestation. Well, you do get that. Then they go off on their quest. And as they go off on their quest, you realise that essentially what you're watching is the Wicker Man gets the plague with some Witchfinder General and with hints of Agira, Wrath of God thrown in for good measure, and an awful lot of mud and pestilence. And Tim McInerney, it's McInerney, isn't it? Tim McInerney, yes. Who is great, and he was good to the point that he came on screen and I didn't recognise him as Tim McInerney, and then I suddenly went, oh, that's Lord Percy, which must be incredibly annoying because he's actually a broad actor, but he's a good enough actor to have thrown that off. And so I enjoyed it. I like the idea that it's got a sort of twisted theological bent. It's the idea of warring theologies, warring religions like that. I mean, it's obviously made on a fairly limited budget, but what it does with that budget in the same way as I think it was going to be released earlier, but it was put back because Centurion was out and because Valhalla Rising was out, and there was a couple of movies about people trudging across pestilential lands that they didn't want it to compete with. This, of all of them, I think is
better than Centurion, is it?
It is, yeah. You didn't like Centurion?
No, I quite enjoyed it. Yeah.
I mean, because it's much more thoughtful than Centurion. I mean, there's a certain amount of graphic horror and torture, obviously, but it's a much more. I mean, it is. They said the key text here is Wicker Man. It's to do with going off into a remote community which you don't really understand, and then discovering that actually they kind of really understand you, but you don't really understand them. And it's about warring theologies.
So in a few years' time, will Nick Cage star in a remake?
I imagine he will. It'll be made in Utah, and at the end, he'll get out of the Wicker Man because there's a ladder going up the back. But it's good fun. I like Christopher Smith, and as I said, it did have a genuinely pestilential air, which I liked.